Hello, everyone. I am Karen Silver from the Office of Population Affairs in the HHS office, and I am filling in for Dr. Diane Foley, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Population Affairs, who I hope will be able to join us in just a bit. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Adolescent Development Explained, Emotional Changes. This webinar is the second in a series of 3 webinars that reviews changes that are normal and necessary in adolescence, different ways that adolescents experience these changes, and how caring adults can support healthy development. Today's webinar focuses on emotional changes during adolescence and shares insights from 2 experts, Dr. Tamar Mendelson and Dr. Veronica Svetaz. OPA worked collectively with Drs. Philip Leaf and Beth Marshall from the Center for Adolescent Health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health to develop the Adolescent Development Explained as website content based on updates to the seminal 1999 Hopkins report called The Teen Years Explained. This updated content is available on the OPA website as web content and as a downloadable PDF file. We're very pleased now to bring you some of that content as a webinar series that you can watch and share with your colleagues. Please note that these webinars are not exhaustive and that there is much more rich content available on the website. Let's get started with a question for all of you. What questions do you have about adolescent emotions? On this slide, we see some of the topics that were sent in before today's webinar. Thank you so much for sharing. Our speakers will address some of these issues during the webinar. Please continue to ask questions using the question box so that we might address them during the Q&A session with our expert presenters, which will follow their presentations. Now I'd like to welcome our first presenter, Dr. Tamar Mendelson, Ph.D., is a Bloomberg Professor of American Health and the Director of the Center for Adolescent Health at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. Dr. Mendelson?
About healthy emotional development in adolescence. So adolescence is a really exciting time for emotional development because a lot is going on. And young people are really increasing their ability to perceive, to assess, to manage emotions. And there are, in particular, 4 big changes that are happening in emotional and social development. So one of those has to do with self-awareness increasing. So this ability to sort of understand, what do I feel? And whereas younger kids may have simpler ways of describing their emotions or may say, I feel good, I feel bad, adolescents are getting increasingly able to have a more nuanced understanding of emotions and being able to identify their emotions across a range, being disappointed, being frustrated, being excited, curious, so a growing sort of emotional vocabulary and self-awareness. A second change is growing social awareness, so understanding more about what other people feel and developing empathy and sort of the ability to perspective take to a greater degree. The third is self-management. So how can I control my emotions when I'm feeling really intense feelings, whether they're positive or negative? And this takes work, of course, so it's sort of an ongoing process over adolescence. And then finally, adolescents are also changing a lot in their ability to manage peer relationships, sort of understanding more about how to make and keep friends. And emotional awareness of oneself and others is, of course, really important for that process. So all of this is going on. And at the same time, there are, as we know, these big biological and physical and cognitive changes. So that just makes things that much more complicated, right? That this is the context. And so teens are likely to have a lot of emotions about all of the changes that they're going through. And these emotions may range from feeling proud or excited about their development and new things that they can do, to feeling ashamed or anxious or frustrated or all of the above. And research shows that teens tend to have more intense emotions. And, of course, that is all, going to come up in the context of all of these new things that they're experiencing physically, biologically, socially. And context and environment have a big impact here. So, for example, if a teenager is either more physically developed or less physically developed than most of their peers, that's probably going to cause some stress and emotional response. And similarly, a young person may feel that they're being given more responsibility than they can handle or less responsibility than they can handle, and that too may spur an emotional response. So, I think that it's important to take into account the fit between what's happening in a teen's environment or context and their emotional well-being. Next slide, please. So in terms of factors that are related to or define emotional development, both hormones and what's changing in the body, as well as self-management skills, have a lot to do with how adolescents navigate this process. So there are a lot of situations that can create stress for adolescents, and these can be both positive sorts of things, like having a new romantic relationship, or having new success at school. But even these positive things can create some stress in terms of anticipating what comes next. Can I handle it? And how do I navigate this? And there's also situations that are more challenging or negative that can come up, including bullying, peer pressure to, engage in behaviors or use substances, academic demands that may become more intense. And for youth who are living in poverty, there are many stressors that may come up, including food insecurity, housing instability, community violence, and other sorts of things. So these are all important as well in terms of how adolescents are going to navigate. It's important then for adolescents to become more independent in their problem solving and how they manage situations. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in some later slides. Dr. Svetaz?
Thank you, Dr. Mendelson. And now I'd like to welcome our second speaker, Dr. Veronica Svetaz. She's a faculty member at the Department of Family Medicine and Community Medicine in Hennepin Healthcare and at the Leadership for Education on Adolescent Health Program at the University of Minnesota Division of Pediatrics. She is also the Diversity Committee Chair at the Society of Adolescent Health and Medicine. Dr. Svetaz?
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. So what we know, it's like all those transformations, right, that Dr. Mendelson was referring to, the brain transformation, the neuroplasticity, the hormones coming at different times, right, create an amplification about their own self-identity and their social self. And it's kind of like the lens of how they see their life and experiences are amplified. And they get so much concentrated in how other people or other events influence their own life and how they fit with those people, like they care. So in that way, they, and I love this quote, like they experience emotions in technicolor. Like so far is the limbic area that is regulating emotions at the beginning when they're like in early adolescence. So those emotions come raw and they come big and they feel it and they're real. And yet they don't have the ability to stop sometimes, think, back up, analyze. So that means like they might need your help, the parents' help, the coach help, the teacher help, kind of like to understand and getting tools on how to handle those emotions. And mainly this, because this is the beginning of where they need to belong and feeling part of the group, it's super important. When most of them reach middle teens years. That's when they start mastering their abstract thinking. That's when they allows them to reflect about their own identity in a more independent way and to think. I like this analogy about the balcony experiences, so where they can start analyzing things with a broader perspective. They take context into the equation, and they help handle the relationship with peers in a different way. They also get more self-awareness when they're like 15, 16, and that can produce sometimes more distress and anxiety, and it's like a role kind of like to coach them into all those things. But this is the time where self-identity in multiple dimensions and aspects start to get settled, some sooner than others, right? And somehow self-esteem is that part of your identity that feels good with who you are, how comfortable you are in your own skin. And as they are progressing in their journey about defining those identities, they have to master how they're going to present those identities to the world, right? It's sort of like the socialization of who they are. And sometimes that's not easy, and that's crucial. And because that's when they start like facing, we all call it the isms, right? The bias, discrimination, and stereotyping. And that can get tricky, and that can decrease their self-esteem. So as important that is self-esteem, sometimes I think it's overrated, and we need to also think about an amazing concept that is coming from mindfulness that everyone working with teens should pay attention, and it's self-compassion. And it's also great, just now that we're here, it's self-compassion for yourself, self-compassion for your teens, self-compassion for the parents, right? And it's that paying attention, that awareness on how you're talking about to yourself and how you're treating yourself, particularly when you fail, and how to learn to think about that failing, it's part of learning, and learning, it's part of growing, right? And the question will be like, what will I do differently next time? What did I learn with this? And how that, because that's the concept that when they learn, first it's parents doing that, right? Or you as a provider or as a coach. And the goal is like one day they're going to be doing the self-reflection by their own, because that's what creates the resiliency and what people call the bounce back ability. I love that term. And that's what is resiliency all about. It's learning like you come back with a lesson. So Dr. Mendelson, next slide. Oh, no, it's me again in a different slide, so sorry. So taking risks have usually been approached usually by the negative side. And what I think we got it wrong, it's like there is a negative side, and there's a piece to it that it's called the from a public health perspective and a coaching perspective, that we need to be aware like there's a social influence on risk perception, meaning when they are with friends, they're going to act differently, and they're going to decrease their sense of danger when analyzing a situation. So we need to help them to learn how to negotiate that with peers in a way that allows them to belong, but not to get in danger. But there's an amazing side of that, particularly in young adolescents and middle adolescents. And it's both ages, teens and middle teens, are far more pro-socially influenced than any other age group. And that has crucial public health implications, because then we need to start by focusing on things that they can do instead of the things that they can't, and by using peers to lead those interventions. And that's as a reminder that the environmental events that they're going to be living with, it's going to have like higher repercussions due to neuroplasticity of the brain, but it's also what allows them to adapt and to learn how to adapt more easily. Identity formation, maybe we can talk about that later in the Q&A, but it's a huge concept, and this is my perception, that sometimes the awareness of the importance of this topic, like we lump identity formation as one task of adolescent, when it's sort of like this kaleidoscopic vision about who you are as a social being, and have so many kind of ramifications. And I think like today we need to create these affirming spaces more than ever, right? Because particularly during this global social political context, with this increase of hate toward any kind of minority status. We need to create these safe spaces that are affirming spaces at the same time. And also because of the relevance of social media in the life of teens that allow them to compare to others who have probably not living in the same reality and the same context that they're living. And last but not least is to remind to all of us about the concept of intersectionality, right? Because those multiple social identities they are forming or they are creating awareness toward them, not only they are additive, but also they are interactive. And you can encounter discrimination in more than one, right? And the burden of that is exponential. And so we need to be aware of that. But it's also true that when they develop this agency to be proud and own who they are, they become agents of change. And I've seen the most amazing teens coming with all of the identities on their hands and ready to roll. So next slide, and back to Dr. Mendelson.
We were just hearing about the importance of resilience and bounce back ability. I like that term as well. And this is very much tied to stress management and how do we manage the challenges that come up in our day-to-day lives. And this is something that adolescents are actively learning how to do. And I already talked a bit about how both positive situations and also negative situations all involve stress. And so it's important for adolescents to start to identify those times where they are feeling stressed. What does that even feel like in the body? And then learn how to respond to stress in thoughtful or effective ways. And I was starting to talk a bit before about how, there is variation in terms of the levels of stress that different young people are exposed to. And for youth who are living in poverty, they may be coping with much higher levels of stress and more intense or more chronic stress having to do with adversities related to poverty or community violence. And there are other, we're going to talk in a moment about trauma. And so there are other teens, who are exposed to trauma, either in the context of poverty or other contexts that create, really high levels of stress that may require different skills for managing. But over the course of adolescence, young people are becoming more independent in their problem solving and their management of situations. And so this calls on them to sort of use their new abilities, their cognitive abilities for reasoning and abstract thinking to help them with emotion management. Next slide, please. So healthy stress management involves learning stress management skills that are effective in terms of getting through a stressful situation without making that situation worse and without sort of trying to handle strong emotions by avoiding them through risky behaviors, substance use, or sort of interpersonal conflicts that may not be constructive. So, this is a process for all of us, and teens are learning actively about what does healthy stress management involve. And really key to helping teens with these skills are supportive relationships with adults. So it may feel like teens don't want adults in their lives, but they very much do need supportive and caring adults to provide that guidance. They need accurate information. So they need to hear from adults or mentors about coping, about emotions, about mental health issues, about how to navigate relationships. And they also need opportunities to build skills. So as they increase in their independence, they're exposed to more and more situations with peers at school and in other settings where they're going to be asked to take on something that might be stressful and navigate that. And these opportunities, as long as they're not too much beyond what the teen is able to handle, are a great way for teens to sort of practice skills and learn from their mistakes. So there are many kinds of coping skills that can be useful for adolescents and for all of us. And I love the mention of mindfulness as a tool. I think this is a really helpful sort of tool, cultivating one's own compassion for oneself, learning how to recognize and tolerate emotions, even difficult emotions, learning how to notice them without reacting to them. And because adolescents' brains are still developing, particularly the prefrontal cortex, those sort of more abstract reasoning skills are still coming online, and teens are more apt to react impulsively or reflexively rather than taking that time to sit and just sort of notice what's happening with them and make a more thoughtful decision. So mindfulness is a great tool for practicing that kind of attention and pausing and noticing. Another really healthy way to manage stress is to talk about what's happening. And so having trusted adults and peers who can be there to listen to an adolescent is really, really important. And that's something that adults can provide that window for positive communication. I mentioned too that young people who have experienced trauma may need more support, and many young people in this country experience traumas. Folks may have heard the term adverse life events, or ACEs, and these are types of traumas, including losing a parent, having different kinds of abuse, living with a parent who has mental health issues, and others. And it's estimated that close to half of young people under age 18 have experienced at least one ACE. That's 34 million children, and over 20% have experienced two. And so, young people who have experienced traumas may have more difficulty regulating emotions and learning healthy stress management tools. And in these cases, sometimes mental health professionals can help build these skills. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mendelson, for reminding us how parents can be sort of like a pillar for our teens, right? And I cannot even start or put in a word to stress how important is parents in the life of our teens. And somehow in our public health work, we have been so successful training parents and coaching parents on how to care and nurture, right, for children through all ages till school age. And then we leave them alone, right? And they recently, only in the next, I'll say the last decade, we started to pay attention about the importance of coaching parents. And it's sort of like it's that knowledge, like that to be successful with your teens, you need to kind of reframe the approach, right? And you need to redefine who is your target. And you need to think in your mind like you have two people that you need to reach out with the same empathy and with the same caring patience, right? One is your teen and the other is the parent. So it's in this pendulum, right? Like at the beginning, just to give teens more independence, somehow we push parents away, like in the 70s. And now I think it's time to kind of bring them back and to foster partnership with them because they're like crucial, that we need to coach them. And I love this quote from Grace Simpson. She's a researcher and a journalist, and she created this amazing tool called Raising Teens. And she talks about like we have an opportunity to revolutionize the way in which we as a society think about parenting, in particularly of adolescents. We can raise awareness about the importance of parenting during adolescence. We can shift negative perceptions about parenting in adolescence. We can provide tools to raising healthy teenagers. And the power to do so, it's well within our grasp. And the effects will reverberate through our schools, our courts, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, and our life. And I think it's mainly in mindset. it's mainly a mindset that allow us to think like parents are under my care too, and I need to be the coach for them. So what we know right now is that there are like 3 different, I'll say, parenting behavior, right? That you want parents to have, and one is this nurturing skill about being supporting, warm, encouraging. This ability to provide discipline, right, and teaching them how to set expectation and then enforce those limits, but with flexibility, right, and the respect by encouraging teens to develop their own opinions. And it's in the equation on how those 3 elements are combined where we found what is really successful for teens. And there's kind of 4 parenting styles. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'm going to say like there's one called the authoritative parenting, and this style is it's kind of like the equivalent. It's positive parenting. It's positive parenting at its best, and it's the equivalent of positive youth development. This is positive parenting development, right? And when you look about intervening parents, you know that you're going to be decreasing all sort of like negative outcomes, lower engagement in risky sexual behavior, lower smoking and substance use, healthy diet and physical activity, higher self-esteem, lower incidence of depression, academic performance, lower delinquency. And sometimes for me, the best way to explain for a parent what it means to be a parent of a teen is to put it like on a, next slide, please, on a coach model. And we created this with Dr. Michelle Allen and with Dr. Garcia Huidobro, and you can see the source of the chapter that we wrote about this, because for us, it was the best way or metaphor to explain the parents what it means and how you need to change your parenting style when you're coaching your team, right? And this idea of like the coach, right, like the soccer coach or the sport coach, like allow you to think like you are this other significant adult, and how would you approach or treat that teen if it were not related to you, right? Because that allows you to depersonalize the behavior of your teen, and that is crucial, because he's not behaving in the way that he's behaving because he wants to be defiant with you. He's behaving the way that he's behaving because he's learning and he's testing his emotion. And sometimes he will be safer with you, so the emotion may come even rawer or more intense because he's testing in a safe place, and you need to be the one coaching them through those situations and giving the tool that Dr. Mendelson was talking to them. But also to have this ability of create independence, right? You need to give them the opportunities to go out and put those tools into play. So that's when it comes to create confidence, observe, let it go, advise them about kind of like situation and what they can do in different situations, kind of like role playing, and calmly let you go to play, meaning experience life. So when they come back, sit down with them and help you debrief the experience and put in that concept about, so what did you learn? Was there anything that it was more difficult than you thought? What can we do differently the next time? Because you are helping them to process all the situation for them to be able to make better decisions in the future. Next slide, please. So in general, parents are always supporting healthy emotional development, right? And this is much of these are the things that Dr. Mendelson was saying, like parents should be doing the same thing that you should be doing as a provider. So sometimes for me, like if I need to explain the parent how to talk to a teen, so I'm thinking about, okay, how did I learn to talk to a teen? So and I talk about the safe space, the active listening, the using all the skills that you got, like listening with your body, right? And responding to the emotions, because those emotions are real. And sometimes you don't agree on why they are upset, right? Or why they are sad. Like, so sometimes you might think like, well, that doesn't, it's not worthy. And it's not up to you to agree or disagree. What you need to do is like tune in with the emotion, because that's the way that you create like this attunement and this connection, emotional connection with your teen. And you create that empathy that it will allow spaces for healing. And parenting thing is all about creating that connection and about trust. And once you got a way that once that you learn on how to get into that emotional connection, it's called the right love to right love communication. That's it. That's the most important thing, because they're going to disclose things that they have been wrestling if they have that ethos, that ability to feel that they can trust you no matter what. So promote the stress management skills, nurture self-regulation skills. So you limit exposure to risky situations, right? So particularly, for example, with drinking, substance abuse, you need to send like crystal clear messages, right? And you pay attention to the warning signs. You look at them, you listen to how they're behaving, and you ask the questions all the time about, this is what I noticed. Are you okay? And by normalizing that it's okay to talk about emotion, and you bringing up the issue, it's kind of like role modeling to them like how important it is to talk, and it is totally normal. And mental health is like this, it's health, and we should be all paying attention to that. And then you need to make your own emotional well-being a priority, right? And there's these things about like when you are, it's also coming from neurobiology, it's called interpersonal biology. When you are in your zone, when you are not stressed, and when you are really listening and empathetic, your teen will get there at the same time, and you will help them. Even like the same thing like a toddler, right? In the middle of a tantrum, when you are calm, that's when you're helping them to get better and to regulate their own emotions. But you need to start by yourself. And sort of like one of the last things that I wanted to kind of like reflect or by now is like the most important thing, like you need to own your teen. Those are tools, and those are things that we can utilize, use at any moment, but you are the one who knows your teen and your context. And that's where you come with your self-empathy for you at the same time. And no one is perfect, and that it's amazingly normal, and you need to be the one like role modeling that part. And when you make a mistake, like apologizing and say, well, I'll get it right the next time, because that's when you are role modeling to them the self-compassion that we're talking about at the beginning. Thank you so very much, and I'm passing now the spot for question and answer to Karen.
Thank you, Dr. Svetaz. And as she noted, we have some time for questions. Dr. Mendelson, the first question is for you. As you know, adolescent development can seem turbulent to adults, especially when it comes to emotions. How can adults determine if the behavior they see from adults is age appropriate, and what should they do if they are concerned that it is not?
I think it's important for adults or parents to distinguish between sort of the normal emotional ups and downs of adolescence versus signs of what may be a mental health issue. And as part of making that distinction, it's important to kind of look for persistent issues. So a mood change or a change in interests and behaviors, something that's uncharacteristic and might persist for, at least a couple of weeks. So for example, if you have a social teen who starts to become isolated and doesn't seem to enjoy spending time with others anymore, that may be a sign that something's happening, that there may be depression or something beyond just an emotional up or down that is, less persistent. And, as we've been hearing, the importance of keeping lines of communication open with the teen is really, really key, because if you do create a space for an adolescent to be able to share what's happening with them, they're more likely to be able to open up if they are going through a difficult emotional period where they may need some support. And, there are resources for handling this. So, being able to reach out to a mental health professional to get an assessment and sort of figure out, is this something that, where an adolescent would benefit from some mental health services or other sorts of supports is really key. And many schools have counselors or mental health professionals there who could be a first point of contact and may also have referrals. Pediatricians can also be a valuable source of information. So, I think it's important for parents and adults to really listen, notice also if they're seeing these kinds of persistent changes I mentioned, and then, really open lines of communication and then look for ways for further assessment and services if they're needed.
Thank you for those insights, Dr. Mendelson. Dr. Svetaz, this next question is for you. How do emotions influence adolescents' decision-making in the context of relationships, such as friendships or romantic relationships?
This is the part that we were explaining sort of like at the beginning, particularly at the beginning of the early adolescenthood, right? Where the emotions, your own identity somehow, it's the reflection on you that you're seeing on your peers, and it can get muddy, right? Because it can get confusing about when a peer or your love partner, if they're in an intimate relation or like starting to date, right? It can get difficult sometimes to distinguish how to separate both things, right? How to separate my own worth through the image that I'm getting reflected on my peers. And one of the things that we also know that it gets when they have to make decision making, right? It's different when they are with peers than when they are alone.
Thank you, Dr. Svetaz. Dr. Mendelson, another question for you. Some members of the audience are community health workers. What are some key pieces of information they should provide to families to help them understand adolescent behavior as it relates to their health?
Adolescent brain development. So adolescent brain development, as we've been discussing, is still in process, and there's going to be more of a tendency for adolescents to make impulsive decisions about their health rather than necessarily having the kind of abstract thinking and reasoning and planning that adults may. And in addition, as we've just heard from Dr. Svetaz, the influence of peers is very powerful. So if adolescents are around their peers, they're more likely to make decisions that they think their peers would approve of, or kind of go along with the crowd and that kind of thing. So I think it's important to communicate to families that teens should be provided with health information that address issues and questions that are important for them. And this information should be given at multiple times in ways that build an information base so that when the option to, say, engage in risky behaviors comes up, teens already have some foundation of knowledge to draw on. And then adults also can limit teens' exposure to risky health situations as teens are maturing, to sort of limit the chances that they'll be in positions where they're less likely to make positive decisions about their own health. Thanks.
And Dr. Svetaz, we've got another question for you. Sometimes parents and other primary caretakers really want to help adolescents avoid feelings of heartache and guilt. What advice can you offer?
I think it's kind of like what we covered at the beginning during the conversation, right? Like first and foremost, discuss the emotion, right? Particularly with guilt or when they're feeling like they fail, particularly in relationships, right? Or they're in a breakup, or they feel like they were not compassionate enough, or like the friend is not caring about them anymore. And getting kind of like to the root of the emotion, but also to learning like to not to look for perfectionism and to allow themselves to using mindfulness, right? To have those hard emotions, but also to think about that sometimes they set standards for themselves that are too high, and they need to rethink about those issues. So I think it's the emotional coaching and talking through the emotion. That's the most important piece.
Thank you. And we've got time for one more question. And Dr. Svetaz, this refers back to one of your slides where the question is, how do you reconcile the actions of calmly allowing teens to explore life, helping them to debrief those experiences, all the while limiting their exposure to risky behaviors?
That's an awesome question. And can you hear me? So that's an awesome question. Like how, because you need to talk about those issues first. So part of those when we were talking at the beginning, and part of the coaching, and it's kind of like the same thing. Like when the coach is sending someone to play, they have like strategy, right? And they will say, okay, this is how I want you to play, and this is how I want you to communicate with your team players. So you continuously talk, and you use sometimes what you're seeing on the TV, and so you use any kind of teachable moment, right, till now, to start discussing about what are the best ways to deal with risky behavior. For example, one of the things that I love the most, it's like when the parents say, like, hey, sometimes you're going to try to avoid risky behavior, but somehow you're going to end up in a situation that you're going to feel uncomfortable. And what I want you to know, like, you can call me, we can create a code, right? And you can call me, and I'm aware, like, sometimes you are not going to be able to say much. So you just say, hey, mom, thumbs up, can you pick me up? And that's my code for me, mom, I don't like where I am, come here and pick me up. And the idea is like, no question asked, I will be there. So you discuss those issues, you create those scenarios, right? And help them debrief about as much as you can, step by step, what they would like, what would you like to see, how they would like to see they handling that. Like the idea is like, at some moment your voice is going to be on their head, right? Like when they get into that risky situation, that they're going to know what to do. Kind of like the same thing that we do as coaches, as providers, as when you're working with a team, right? That you allow them to role model how they're going to handle a peer, for example, in a different situation. But once you feel like they have enough preparation, then you need to start like gradually giving them independence, right? And sometimes, like, I know, like, for some parents, that's one of the most difficult things to do. But it's in that situation where they go and do, and then they come back, that will allow you to revisit and ask those things. And most of the time, this is the fascinating piece. The disclosure comes, it's not that because you are asking or you are following, right? The real disclosure comes because your team trusts you. And they trust you so much that they're going to share with you, like, at some moment they feel uncomfortable with something that happened, and share with you, like, by the way, right? And most of us as parents, we know when those times come. I know, like, for my son, it comes like at night, like 10, when he's on the bed. So sometimes I will go with him and try to find those moments where I know that he's going to be sharing with me the things that are in their head and bothering him. So hopefully, let me know if I answered the question.
You did. Thank you very much. So everyone, that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Dr. Mendelson and Dr. Svetaz, for sharing your expert insights. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Please join us on Wednesday, September 25th next week for our final webinar in this series. And that day we'll learn about the social roles, expanding social circles, and online interactions experienced by today's adolescents. Thank you.